From the outside, Elena's marriage looked flawless. 20 years beside Daniel Langford, a man whose polished smile and perfect suits made him the envy of every dinner party. He was a lawyer with a sharp mind and a reputation for integrity, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and made people feel seen. Together, they had the large house with white shutters, the expensive vacations, the polished photographs lining their hallway. But Elena knew that beauty often hid cracks too fine for others to see. She thought of the way Daniel never lingered at home, how his phone was always buzzing, always turned screen down on the counter. She thought of the way their conversations had thinned, like fabric worn almost transparent. Some nights they sat at the same table in silence, chewing food that tasted of duty rather than comfort. Once she would have told herself this was marriage, the natural cooling of fire into companionship. But lately a strange emptiness gnawed at her, a void that felt more dangerous than anger, more frightening than loneliness. Daniel, of course, didn't notice. Or perhaps he did and chose not to. He was good at looking only where he wanted to. "Elena," he had said one night, his voice brisk as he scrolled through a case file, "you worry too much. We have a good life. Be grateful." The words were meant to soothe, but they stuck in her like a thorn. "Gratitude," he suggested, "should silence doubt." She watched him from across the table that evening, the lamplight glinting off his wedding ring, and wondered if she had become invisible to him. Or worse, replaceable. The house was quiet now. Elena stood in the hallway, her gaze fixed on the framed portrait of their 10th anniversary, Daniel's arm around her waist, both of them smiling for the camera. She remembered how he had whispered, "To the next 10 years," and how she had believed him without hesitation. But 10 years had passed, and her belief had eroded into something brittle. She touched the glass frame with the tips of her fingers, feeling the faint chill. A shadow passed through her heart, a whisper of suspicion she dared not speak aloud. And yet deep inside, she sensed that betrayal was already walking toward her door. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Daniel had already gone upstairs, claiming exhaustion after another long day in court. Elena lingered in the kitchen, stacking dishes that didn't need stacking, wiping counters that were already spotless. Restlessness pressed against her ribs. She heard it then, the muffled vibration of a phone. Daniel's phone. He had left it on the counter, screen down as always. The sound buzzed again, insistent. For a moment she stood frozen, staring at the black screen as though it might burn her. She had never been the type to pry. Daniel valued his privacy like armor, and she had long since learned not to breach it. But something in her, some quiet voice she had ignored for too long, pushed her hand forward. The screen lit up at her touch. One message glowed on the lock screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night. When will I see you again?" Her throat went dry. The sender's name was just S, a single initial, nothing more. Elena's first instinct was denial. It had to be a wrong number, a prank, some client who worded things poorly. But as she read the message again, the words pulsed with intimacy. "Last night. See you again." They belonged to a lover, not a stranger. She locked the phone quickly, placing it back exactly as it had been, her hands trembling. Her heart pounded so hard she thought Daniel might hear it from upstairs. When she finally climbed the stairs to their bedroom, he was already asleep, his breathing steady, his arm flung across the pillow as if the weight of the world had never touched him. She stood in the doorway, staring at him, torn between waking him to demand the truth and burying the discovery deep inside herself. "Grateful," he had told her. "Be grateful." But gratitude suddenly felt like a chain around her throat. She slid beneath the covers beside him, staring at the ceiling, the glow of the message burning behind her eyelids. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she was overreacting. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already sprouting. In the silence of the night, Elena realized trust had a sound, and in her marriage, it had just cracked. The morning after the message, Elena watched Daniel move through the kitchen as if nothing had changed. He kissed her cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and left with his usual calm precision. To him, it was just another day. To her, the world had shifted. She tried to brush it away, to tell herself she was imagining things. But imagination didn't explain the text. Imagination didn't explain the way Daniel now guarded his phone, keeping it in his pocket even when he showered. At dinner, the silence between them grew thicker. Once their meals had been filled with casual stories about his cases or her volunteer work at the library. Now Daniel ate quickly, eyes flicking to his buzzing phone, smiling faintly at messages he never shared. "Busy day?" Elena asked, her voice too bright. "Always," he replied curtly, not looking up. The words struck like a door shutting in her face. She began watching him more closely. The late nights at the office that stretched later, the calls he took in another room, his voice hushed, the way he smelled faintly of cologne when he came home past midnight. Though he claimed to have been buried in paperwork, each detail was small, but together they formed a picture she could no longer ignore. One evening, when he stepped into the shower, she tried again. She scrolled through his phone quickly, but the messages were gone. Deleted. A clean slate. He was covering his tracks. Her stomach knotted. He knew she might look. That night she lay awake beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. She wanted to believe in the man who had once held her hand at the altar, who had whispered vows of fidelity. But the weight of suspicion pressed harder, heavier. Her mind replayed the text over and over, each word cutting deeper. Can't stop thinking about last night. By the third week of watching, Elena realized she was unraveling. Her reflection in the mirror looked thinner, haunted. Fear had taken root in her chest, and paranoia bloomed like a dark flower. And then, one afternoon at the grocery store, she saw a face she didn't recognize, but one that seemed to recognize her. A young woman, smiling, too warmly. Elena first noticed her in the produce aisle. A young woman, mid-20s, sleek hair, polished clothes, the kind of poise Elena once remembered having. She reached for a basket of apples, then paused, her eyes lifting toward Elena with a flicker of recognition. It was the smile that unsettled her most. Warm, practiced, as if they shared a secret Elena didn't know she was part of. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice light, friendly. "You're Elena, right? Daniel's wife?" Elena stiffened. "Yes, and you are?" Sarah Jameson. "I work with your husband sometimes. He's mentioned you." There was nothing unusual in the words, yet something in Sarah's tone lingered too comfortably on your husband. Elena's chest tightened. "I see," she replied coolly. Sarah's smile softened, almost apologetic. "He talks about you a lot. Says you're the one who keeps everything together." The words were kind, but they cut. Daniel hadn't said anything about Elena in weeks, had barely looked at her over dinner. And here was this young woman, standing in a grocery store, delivering praise he hadn't spoken at home in years. Elena forced a polite nod. "Yes, well, Daniel is very dedicated to his work." Sarah chuckled, her eyes flicking downward. "That's one way to put it." Then she turned back to her cart. "Anyway, it was nice to finally meet you." The conversation ended there, but the echo of it followed Elena out of the store, through the drive home, into the quiet of the kitchen. "Finally meet you." The phrase lodged like a splinter. That night, when Daniel returned late again, Elena studied him with new eyes. The faint trace of cologne, the subtle disheveling of his tie. She thought of Sarah's smile, the ease in her voice, the familiarity that didn't belong. "Long day?" she asked. He didn't look up from loosening his tie. "Always." She wanted to scream at him, demand to know if Sarah was the one from the message, if last night had belonged to her. But the words choked in her throat, smothered by fear of his calm dismissal. Instead, she forced a smile, masking the storm within. But in the darkness of their bedroom, as Daniel drifted into sleep beside her, Elena could still see Sarah's smile in the fluorescent glow of the grocery aisle, bright, knowing, and sharp as a blade. Elena waited until the next evening. She rehearsed her words in the mirror, tried to steady her trembling voice, tried to make herself strong enough. But when Daniel walked through the door, loosening his tie with that same weary smile, her courage faltered. Still, she forced the question out. "Who is Sarah Jameson?" Daniel froze, only for a moment, then let out a laugh, soft, incredulous. "Sarah? She's a junior associate at the firm." "Why? I ran into her yesterday. She seemed very familiar with you." He raised an eyebrow, his expression caught between amusement and irritation. "Elena, are you really upset over a grocery store conversation?" "That's ridiculous," her chest tightened. She knew me. She knew us. And the way she— Daniel cut her off, his tone sharper now. You've always had an overactive imagination. You read too much into things. Sarah is nothing more than a colleague. That's all. The firmness of his voice, the calm certainty made her falter. She wanted to cling to her suspicion, to the unease Sarah's smile had carved into her heart. But Daniel's gaze was steady, unyielding, the same gaze that had silenced her questions so many times before. I'm not imagining this, she whispered. He stepped closer, placing a hand on her arm, his touch both tender and heavy. Elena, you are. You've been tense lately, restless. Maybe it's the house, or maybe it's you feeling lonely. But don't invent shadows that aren't there. Her throat burned. Shadows that aren't there. Daniel's calmness became its own weapon, making her doubt her memory, her instincts. Had Sarah really looked at her with such knowing warmth? Had the text even meant what she thought it had? The more he spoke, the less sure she became. Trust me, he said, his voice low, persuasive. There's nothing going on. Don't let paranoia ruin what we have. Helena nodded faintly, but inside she felt hollow. His words wrapped around her like a net, but it wasn't safety. It was suffocation. That night, lying beside him, she stared into the dark, unable to decide whether she was losing him or losing her mind. Elena hadn't seen Mia in years, but when the invitation for coffee arrived in her inbox, she accepted without hesitation. Perhaps it was instinct, some deep part of her knowing she needed a familiar face, someone who remembered her before her marriage had begun to fray. They met at a small cafe downtown, the kind they used to haunt in their 20s. Mia was unchanged in spirit, her laugh warm, her eyes sharp. They slipped easily into conversation, catching up on children, work, the passage of time. For a brief moment, Elena felt lighter, but then Mia's tone shifted. Elena, I wasn't sure if I should say this, but I think you deserve to know. A cold ripple ran through Elena's chest. Know what? Mia hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I've seen Daniel. More than once. With a woman, Elena's breath caught. Sarah, she whispered before she could stop herself. Mia blinked. Yes, you know her? The world tilted. Her suspicions had a name, and her friend had given it voice. She said she worked with him. She might, Mia said gently. But Elena, the way I saw them together, it wasn't professional. It was intimate. Elena's throat closed around the word, intimate. Mia reached for her hand. I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve the truth. The cafe around them blurred. The sound of cups clinking, laughter, the hiss of steaming milk. All of it faded under the weight of Mia's words. Elena forced herself to nod, to thank her friend, but inside her heart cracked open. When she returned home that evening, Daniel was at his desk, reviewing papers. He looked up, offered her the same calm smile he always did. The same smile that had once meant love, now soured with deceit. Good day? He asked casually. Elena stared at him, her hands tightening around her purse straps. She wanted to scream, to throw Mia's confession at him like a weapon. But his calmness, the mask he wore so flawlessly, stopped her. Instead, she murmured, Fine. Later, in bed beside him, her tears soaked the pillow in silence. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was betrayal carefully hidden, deliberately nurtured, and that hurt far worse. It began with another excuse. Daniel kissed her on the cheek as he slipped into his coat, murmuring, Late case review. Don't wait up. His tone was smooth, casual, as though he had rehearsed it. Elena smiled faintly, but her insides twisted. She knew now. Mia's words, Sarah's smile, the text message, they all wove together into one undeniable picture. This time she didn't stay home. She waited 15 minutes, then grabbed her keys. Her hands trembled against the steering wheel as she followed the familiar curve of his car's taillights down the darkened streets. Each red light was torture, each turn a confirmation that her suspicions were guiding her toward something final. Daniel drove past the office, past the courthouse, past every place his excuses had once named. Her heart pounded harder with each block until he slowed, pulling into a quiet street of apartments. Elena parked a few spaces back, her breath shallow. He stepped out, checked his watch, and walked toward a door she couldn't mistake, Sarah's apartment. The porch light glowed warm as the door opened, and Sarah's silhouette filled the frame. She smiled as if welcoming home a lover, Not a colleague. Daniel leaned in, kissed her, and disappeared inside. Elena's world cracked. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, staring at the closed door. The grief that filled her chest was sharp, hot, mixing with fury. Years of silence, of swallowing doubt, of trusting words that twisted her into weakness. All of it flared now into fire. Through the thin curtains, shadows moved. Two figures close, familiar. She couldn't hear them, but she didn't need to. The truth was carved into every gesture, every laugh, every touch. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hand to her mouth to muffle a sob. This was the man who had told her to be grateful. The man who had sworn she was imagining things. He had built a world of lies around her, and she had lived in it blindly, faithfully. She sat there for nearly an hour watching, her grief simmering into something colder, harder. Finally, when Daniel's car lights flared again, she ducked low, hiding in the shadows. He drove off, unaware she had witnessed it all. Elena followed him home in silence, her hands steady now. The doubt was gone. The truth was hers, searing and undeniable. And when he walked through their front door, smiling faintly as if nothing had happened, she knew something inside her had already broken beyond repair. The moment Daniel stepped back into the house, Elena was waiting. She sat at the kitchen table, the light above her casting sharp shadows across her face. For once, she didn't mask her expression. Fury burned openly in her eyes. "You weren't at the office," she said flatly. Daniel paused in the doorway, coat still on, tie loosened. "What are you talking about?" "I followed you," Elena snapped. "I saw you with her, Sarah." The silence between them cracked like glass. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly, his voice calm, measured. "Elena, you're exhausted. You're imagining. Don't you dare." Her voice broke, but the anger in it steadied her. "I saw you walk into her apartment. I saw you kiss her. I saw everything." Daniel dropped his coat onto the chair, his mask slipping into irritation. "So what if I did? You've been clinging to me like a shadow, questioning every late night, every call. Do you even hear yourself?" Elena rose from the table, trembling. "Do you hear yourself? You lied to me, Daniel. For months, maybe years." His laugh was cold, hollow. "And what did you expect? You've been so consumed with suspicion you stopped being a wife. I needed something else. Someone else." The words cut deeper than any blade. Elena staggered back, pressing a hand to her chest. "After everything we built, after 20 years, you throw it away for her?" Daniel's eyes hardened. "Don't make this dramatic. People change. Love changes. Maybe you should have too." Elena felt heat rising inside her, a fire fed by every dismissal, every time he had silenced her doubts, every lie spoken with a calm smile. "You made me feel crazy. You made me doubt myself, and all along it was you." For the first time, Daniel's voice rose, sharp as steel. "You don't get to accuse me, Elena. You don't get to rewrite our life as betrayal just because you couldn't keep me satisfied." The words slammed into her. The storm inside her broke loose, grief, rage, betrayal swirling until she could barely breathe. And in that storm, a dangerous thought began to take root. If the man she loved was gone, what was left to lose? The kitchen was alive with the storm of their voices, each word sharper than the last. Elena's hands shook as she braced against the counter, Daniel looming over her with the cold authority he had always wielded. "You think you're the victim here?" he sneered. "You're pathetic, Elena. You cling to me, you doubt me, and now you want to play the martyr. No wonder I went looking elsewhere." The words struck like blows. She wanted to cover her ears, to stop the poison from sinking deeper, but she stood frozen, her breath ragged. Her hand brushed against something on the counter, a knife left from dinner preparations. Without thinking, her fingers curled around the handle. The cool metal steadied her, trembling. Daniel's eyes flicked down, then back up to her face. He laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Really? That's what you've been reduced to? Waving a knife like some desperate housewife?" "Stop," Elena whispered, her voice trembling but raw. "Or what?" He stepped closer, daring her, his tone dripping with contempt. "You've never had the strength to stand up to me. You wouldn't dare." The fire inside her roared, fed by years of his lies, his manipulation, the way he had twisted her love into weakness. Her grip on the knife tightened. "Don't push me," she warned, though even she could barely hear herself over the pounding in her chest. Daniel leaned closer, his lips curling in a cruel smile. "You can't even decide what's real half the time. You're nothing without me, Elena, nothing." Something in her snapped. The years of silence, the gaslighting, the image of Sarah's smile, the sound of his lies. All of it collided into one unbearable truth. He had destroyed the life she thought they shared, and he dared to stand there, mocking her pain. The knife moved before she knew she had willed it. A sudden thrust, a gasp, a silence that fell heavier than any argument could. Daniel's eyes widened, his smirk vanishing, replaced by shock. He staggered back, clutching his side, the color draining from his face. Elena stood frozen, breath shallow, the knife still in her hand. The kitchen echoing with the weight of what she had done. The sound was gone. No shouting, no taunts, just silence. Daniel lay crumpled on the kitchen floor, his eyes wide in shock, his breath shallow and ragged. A dark stain spread across his shirt, blooming into the tiles beneath him. Elena stood frozen, the knife still clutched in her hand, its blade slick with red. Her chest heaved as though her body didn't belong to her. She had expected screams, panic, the urge to run. Instead, an eerie calm seeped in, like the stillness after a storm. He tried to speak, lips forming broken words, but no sound came. His hand lifted weakly, reaching toward her, then fell limp against the tile. His chest rose once more, then stilled. Elena's knees buckled and she dropped to the floor, the knife clattering beside her. A sob tore from her throat, raw and jagged. She pressed trembling fingers to his wrist, searching for a pulse she already knew was gone. "Daniel." Her voice cracked, breaking in the emptiness. The kitchen felt foreign now, a crime scene masquerading as home. The smell of roasted garlic from dinner clashed with the sharp tang of iron in the air. The clock ticked above her, each second hammering the reality deeper. There was no undoing this. She crawled back, pressing against the cabinets, her hands streaked with blood. For years she had felt powerless, silenced, invisible. Now she had done the unthinkable, and the weight of it pressed down until she could barely breathe. Her eyes fell on the photographs hanging in the hallway, their smiling faces watching her through the doorway. The life they had built, the perfect image they had shown the world, shattered in a single moment. A part of her wanted to call the police immediately, to confess, to let the truth swallow her whole. But another voice whispered louder, "You'll lose everything." Her breaths came shallow, her body trembling, yet underneath it all pulsed that strange, terrible calm. Nothing would ever be the same. She knew that with certainty. Elena stood on unsteady legs, staring down at Daniel's lifeless body. The silence was unbearable, but she understood something chilling. Silence was now her only ally, and it would tell her what she had to do next. Elena stood over Daniel's body for what felt like hours, but when she finally moved, it was as though something inside her had snapped into survival. The shock dulled, replaced by a mechanical determination. She fetched a rag, a bucket, gloves, items she barely remembered gathering, and dropped to her knees. Her hands scrubbed at the tiles, the red smearing before it faded to pink. The smell of bleach burned her nostrils, mixing with the metallic tang still heavy in the air. No matter how hard she pressed, she could see the stains seeping into the cracks, permanent as memory. She dragged Daniel's body into the laundry room, her arms trembling with the effort. His weight was unbearable, but adrenaline carried her through. She covered him with an old blanket, forcing herself not to look at his face. Her mind raced ahead. The neighbors, the police, questions she wasn't ready to answer. She rehearsed excuses aloud, whispering into the silence. "He's away on business, late case review, not feeling well." The lies sounded flimsy, childish, but she repeated them until her voice grew steady. Every sound in the house jolted her. The creak of the stairs, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock. Each one felt like an accusation. The walls themselves seemed to know what she had done. When she finished scrubbing, she poured the bloody rags into a garbage bag and carried it outside, the night air cold and biting. She shoved the bag deep into the bin, her hands shaking as if they might betray her. Back inside, the kitchen gleamed unnaturally, every surface scrubbed raw. Yet she couldn't stop seeing it. The moment, the knife, the look in his eyes. No amount of bleach could erase it. She sank into a chair, her body heavy, her breath shallow. In the silence, she heard her own heartbeat pounding like footsteps closing in. She had hidden the evidence, but she couldn't hide from herself. Elena glanced at the phone on the counter. For a moment, she considered dialing the police, confessing everything. But her hand hovered, frozen. She wasn't ready, not yet. Instead, she whispered into the emptiness, "Tomorrow. I'll figure it out tomorrow." But tomorrow, she knew, would not bring peace, only the echo of what she had done. It was the knock that ended her silence. Sharp, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Lena's heart sank as she wiped her hands on her skirt, though she had nothing left to clean. Through the window, she saw the flashing blue and red lights washing over the front of the house. The neighbors must have heard something, raised voices, or maybe seen her dragging the garbage bag earlier. Either way, the waiting was over. She opened the door slowly. 2 officers stood there, grim but polite. "Mrs. Langford? We've had a report of a disturbance. May we come in?" Elena stepped aside without protest. "Yes," she said, her voice hollow. "You should." They entered the kitchen, their eyes scanning the unnaturally spotless counters, the faint smell of bleach still clinging to the air. One officer glanced toward the closed laundry room door, then back at her. "Is there anyone else in the house tonight?" Her lips parted, the words catching in her throat. She could lie, she had rehearsed so many lies, but the weight of them crushed her before they could form. "No," she whispered. "Just him." The officers moved past her, opening the door. Silence followed, then a murmur into radios. Elena closed her eyes as the sound of footsteps filled the hall again. "Mrs. Langford," the taller officer said carefully. "Would you like to explain what happened?" Elena nodded, her body trembling but her voice steady. "I killed him." The words felt like glass leaving her throat, jagged but strangely freeing. "I killed my husband." The officer's expression didn't change. He simply gestured toward a chair. "Sit down, please." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap, staring at the floor as questions came, gentle but firm. She answered them all, about Sarah, the affair, the fight, the knife. She told them everything, because there was nothing left to protect. When it was over, they didn't handcuff her. Not yet. One officer stood quietly by the door waiting for transport, while the other finished writing. Elena drifted to the hallway mirror. Her reflection stared back, pale, hollow-eyed, smeared with exhaustion. She barely recognized the woman looking at her. Justice had come, but it wasn't the flashing lights or the uniforms that broke her. It was the realization staring back at her, that in ending Daniel's life, she had ended her own.